Hi everyone, thank you for joining the webinar today. We're just going to give people about 2 more minutes to join the webinar and then we'll start bang on at about 11:02. So hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. So today we'll be covering the topic of microaggressions, stereotypes and bias, understanding what these terms mean, real life examples and case studies, and providing you with practical tips, advice and actions that you can take back to help you challenge and eliminate these behaviours in the workplace. As you're aware, I'm limited to 20 minutes, so I'll try and cover as much information as possible. There's an option to ask questions at the end. And our trainings cover all of these subjects in more detail, so please do get in touch if you want any information on those. So an introduction, so my name is Shagufta Sharif and I'm the Development Manager at WISE, and I currently support businesses who are working to create diverse and inclusive workplaces. I've got my colleague here as well, so Evelyn, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Evelyn. I'm the Events Officer at WISE. I work in the comms team and I organise lots of events for WISE.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll just take the camera off there so I'm not staring at myself. Next. So I'm going to start with a really short, quick activity. So if you've got pen and paper next to you, I'd like you to draw. Imagine you're a 12-year-old and I want you to draw a perception of what a 12-year-old would think a science professor would look like. So if you take yourselves back to when you were 12, you've probably never met a science professor at this stage. So I want you to imagine what they'd look like, what they'd wear, what their background is like, and sketch a really quick drawing next to you, or even imagine it in your mind if you haven't got pen and paper to hand, what you imagine a science professor looks like when I kind of say those words. And I'll give you a couple of seconds to just kind of jot a little idea down or a little drawing down, and it doesn't have to be a masterpiece of any sort. So when you've done that, give you a couple of seconds to do that. And now I'm going to share with you my little drawing of what we tend to get when we ask someone to do that. So does it look something like this? Male, white lab coat, glasses, frizzy hair, usually a test tube in the picture as well somewhere. However, if you were a 12-year-old of today, what would you do? You'd probably go into Google Images to have a look and see what a science professor looks like. And this is what you get when you Google the image of science professor in 2020. So yes, similar, probably similar to a lot of the drawings that you've done as well. So that's what they would look like. Frizzy hair, glasses, that kind of thing. So let's see what professor is like. So if we go on to professor and Google that, and again, you get the same thing, all male, all white. There's a random picture of Donald Trump on there. I have no idea why he comes up as a professor in 2020, but there you go. So let's have a look at the reality. So what is the reality? In reality, the stereotype is real. The majority of professors are white, male, non-disabled, and usually over 40. So what's wrong then? Well, now imagine if this stereotype is consistently shown and promoted and the impact this has on future recruitment and aspirations. So, you know, are people going to, is that the stereotype that's going to follow through? In fact, I was talking to a plumber about this the other day, and she said that she finds exactly the same thing. As soon as it said she, was there a little thing inside you that went up? You know, like, oh, plumber, female, she? That's unconscious bias, and you can't help yourself. It's because it's in your lifetime, you've almost always associated plumber with male. The plumber box in your head is male. So when you're faced with a female plumber, your box makes you go, oop, because it doesn't fit. You know logically that plumbers can be female, but your cave person brain cuts in immediately, and your modern brain comes in later to say, actually, plumbers can be female. The point of unconscious bias training is not to stop your cave person brain. You can't do that. But to train your modern evolved brain to override the gut reaction of your cave person brain so that you don't make dubious decisions based on gut reactions and instead make decisions based on logic and fact. So you've already judged me based on my gender, my age, my position, based on my clothes, my background, and we can't help but make these judgments. Whilst in the Zoom era, how many of us have peered into people's homes to get an insight into what people are like? We look at people's surroundings and backgrounds and we create a picture in our minds. It's a natural part of our evolution to make instantaneous judgments in order to survive. Is it safe to eat? Should I run away? We learn to make these judgments by creating boxes against which we judge everything. Does it match a box that is safe? The problem in the modern world is that these gut reaction judgments can lead to very risky decisions. So here's a psychological explanation. So unconscious bias refers to a bias that we are unaware of, something that happens outside of our control. It happens automatically, and it's triggered by our brain making quick judgments and assessments of people and situations, and it's influenced by our background and our personal experiences. And here's the evolutionary explanation. We automatically make 100 microsecond judgment of everyone we see. And neuroscience says that our cave person brain makes about 200,000 operations for every single thought made by our modern brain. This means it's very easy to default to a decision based on first impressions, which can be biased. And this leads to poor decisions rather than well-considered decisions. So when we discuss bias, there's so many different types, and I've listed a few here. So affinity bias, for example, leads us to favour people who we feel we have some kind of connection or similarity to. For example, they may have attended the same college, they may have grown up in the same town as you, or they remind you of yourself or someone you know and like. And this can have a massive impact during recruitment. For instance, interactions with people we share an affinity will differ from people we share no affinity to. So if a candidate walks in, they tell you they're a little nervous, we may smile more and offer more words of encouragement to them and put them at ease. Whereas if a person we share no affinity to says the same thing, we wouldn't behave quite as warm towards them. There's the halo effect. So the halo effect occurs when we perceive one great thing about the person and let that halo glow of that one thing colour our opinions of everything else about that person. For example, we may notice that someone went to a really highly regarded university, or they've attained a really high grade in something, and we tend to let this achievement influence how we see everything else about that person. The horns effect is the direct opposite of the halo effect. So it occurs when perception of someone is unduly influenced by one negative trait. For example, if we don't like the way someone dresses, we might assume they're also lazy and unprofessional, even though professionalism and competence are not related to attire. Being aware of these various biases can help you counter their influence over you and aid in more sound decision-making during hiring and promotion. And I'd urge you to kind of go and explore these different biases online as well. Stereotypes are all around us from before we're born. I mean, you might have come across gender reveal parties, before this whole lockdown situation happened. And, young kids aged about 3, 4, 5 already know that pink means girl and blue means boy. So these stereotypes are built from TVs, newspapers, and our environments. So, like, for example, where does the idea that engineering is for men come from? It's built in from such a young age. Although some companies are trying to create less gendered toys, they continue to perpetuate stereotypes in their new products. For example, Barbie Korea and Lottie dolls show more careers and BME characters, but they continue to be female-dominated careers, such as doctors and vets, or highly stereotypical for scientists, so they'll be wearing white lab coats or having hard hats or anything like that. And there's so many negative stereotypes that you've probably heard of as well. So things like Black people tend to be more prone to criminal behaviour, Muslims are terrorists, disabled people are intellectually challenged. All of these kind of stereotypes are out there in society. There's also a survey that you can find online which ranks accents from around the UK on intelligence. So where have these stereotypes come from? They've come from the media, past experiences, and the important thing to remember is that these still continue. You may have heard the term positive stereotypes. Positive stereotypes are no more valid than negative ones. And here are a couple of examples that you may have come across. So you might have heard Asian people are good at maths. Why is this then actually negative? Not only is this stereotype statistically unproven, it's also negative because it puts pressure on Asian students to excel in school. And this can result in self-defeating thoughts, feelings, and behaviours when the ideal cannot be achieved. This in turn can take a significant toll on a person's psyche and sense of self-worth. Women are nurturing. Not every woman has an innate mothering instinct. Some women choose never to have children, leaving motherhood entirely out of scope of their personal journeys. This stereotype can be negative. People assume that a woman who does not have a child is unhappy or has less value than one who does. It can also limit the roles a woman feels she can step into with approval. Microaggressions is a term that came about in the 1970s, and microaggressions are often discussed in a racial context for anyone in a marginalised group, be it as a result of their gender, sexual orientation, disability or religion, can experience one. Microaggressions are more than just insults or insensitive comments. There's something very specific, the kind of remarks, questions or actions that are painful because they have to do with a person's membership in a group that's discriminated against or subject to stereotypes. And a key part of what makes them so disconcerting is that they happen casually, frequently, and often without any harm intended in everyday life. Gender microaggressions include sexual objectification, the use of sexist language, making assumptions based on gender, the use of sexist humour, slights, insults, or using derogatory analogy. Some of these subtle and not so subtle actions or comments may not seem like a big deal, and one incident in isolation may not be, but in reality, these types of incidents inhibit women from doing their best work, being optimally productive, and undermine their success. Women and Black and minority ethnic communities cite these types of disrespectful, sometimes toxic behaviours as one of the factors that influence the decisions to leave a job. A steady diet of microaggression disrespects and wears people down. When they cite these types of behaviours as factors that lead to a reluctant decision to leave a job that they otherwise like, they describe it as death by 1,000 cuts. When we think about racism, we often refer to, we kind of link it to crude, offensive actions and language, something most of us would never ever consider saying or doing. However, racism and sexism has mutated. Obviously, offensive actions are now termed as old-fashioned racism. Modern racism is subtle, indirect, and ambiguous. Many people refer to these behaviours as micro-incivilities because this connects them to something called organisational citizenship behaviour. Organisational citizenship behaviour has been shown to be related to effective performance of teams. Micro-incivilities are daily, commonplace behaviours or aspects of the working environment which signal to outgroups that they do not belong, and sometimes referred to as everyday racism, and they include things like this. So constantly interrupting a minority, never looking at someone in meetings, and so on. And these actions all say you're not welcome or valued here. These are small, insignificant behaviours that on their own wouldn't mean much, but they are small but corrosive behaviours that over time have a huge impact. Their power actually comes from those in the majority believing that they are trivial or insignificant. In fact, micro-incivilities cause more distress because it's difficult to know how to interpret them and to respond to them. There are some who think that microaggressions are a much ado about nothing. They might say that microaggression is a product of political correctness or that it causes a walking on eggshells sort of atmosphere. Microaggressions are slow building, incremental damage that snowballs into something a lot bigger. The reaction to a microaggression may seem disproportionate. Why is that person reacting, why is that person so angry? I only meant it as a joke or a compliment, but the person is not just reacting to what happened today, they're also reacting to something that happened 5 days ago, 5 months ago, 5 years ago, or even 5 minutes ago, and I'll go on to give you an example of that. Subtle discrimination compounds over time, leading to distress and anxiety. These are some microaggressions, common microaggressions that you may have come across in your own lives. So people using endearing names in professional environment. Comments like this detract from authority and you're less likely to be taken seriously. Negotiating for a promotion or a pay increase, a man does it, it's ambitious and confident, and a woman does it, it's seen as bossy, demanding, aggressive and intimidating. Benevolent sexism, believing that women need protection and are weak. Assumptions that your role isn't technical or your skills and experience are underestimated. So, women being asked to take notes in meetings, shaking hands with men, assuming the woman in the room is the secretary. And this still happens. An invasion of space and inappropriate touching, that still happens too. Comforting hand on the back as they pass, disrespecting of space. Here are a few more examples of the types of microaggressions that you may have come across. Do any of these resonate? I mean, I've heard some of those myself. So things like, where are you really from? You know, that kind of signals to the person who's being asked of is that you don't come from here, so you don't actually belong. You're too pretty to be an engineer is another one that we've actually, a female engineer has shared that with us. Oh, and I don't know how to pronounce those names. That's another one that's quite common, which, you know, again, just kind of signals that you're not a part of the group. I wanted to share this modern example. This happened a couple of weeks ago, and you might have come across it on Twitter. So this is a Twitter thread from a Black female barrister who went to the courthouse to represent her client. She laid out her experiences and explained what happened and how many times she was stopped and dismissed. So first, the security officer asked her what her name was because he couldn't find her list on the list of defendants. She explained she was a barrister. He apologised and guided her through security. And, you know, she kind of shrugged it off, innocent mistake. Secondly, then after speaking to my client, I opened the door to the courtroom to discuss the case with the prosecutor, who was sitting inside. The bench weren't in the room, so it was a perfect time. And a member of the public told her not to go into the courtroom. And I said, why? And she said, because it's a court and only lawyers can go in. And she thought she was a journalist. Then, as she opened the door, she went in, and the barrister stopped her. Another solicitor stopped her from going in. And when she explained she was a barrister, the solicitor was embarrassed and said, oh, I see, and let her through. She then turned back around and walked towards the prosecutor, ready to have a conversation. And before she got there, the clerk very loudly told her to leave the courtroom and then said that the usher who was with her would be out shortly. And before I could respond, she then asked if I was represented. And again, I explained that I'm a defence barrister trying to speak to the prosecutor. She looked at me and said, oh, right, okay, and continued what she was doing. And I think that was the most striking moment for me when I was reading this Twitter thread. The clerk continued with what she was doing. Just hold that thought for a moment. For the clerk, this was an innocent mistake and an error in her day. For the barrister, this was the 4th time she'd been treated in this way in a couple of minutes. So can you imagine the frustration that's building up inside the barrister having to defend herself constantly? Microaggressions have a huge impact on the people experiencing them, and this includes a biological impact, changes in blood pressure and the immune system, cognitive impact, the impact on the amount of attention, focus, ability to problem solve. Imagine the amount of attention being taken away thinking about the microaggression. Emotionally, the person is left feeling anxious, helpless, and unsettled. And behavioural impact, the person is forced to change their behaviour to adapt, and this may not always be helpful. So how to avoid microaggressions and micro-incivilities is to start with yourself. Know your potential to be a perpetrator. I know of an example where 2 people went to pitch for a project to deliver diversity training for a company. They won the contract. However, the company that was, who was asking for the training asked that the main speaker, who was a woman, not deliver the training. And the feedback was that the presentation was excellent. However, the presenter had presented to the white male in the room and not made any eye contact with the black female. So know your potential to be a perpetrator, and it's important to be self-aware and know your biases. At any given time, we could be experiencing them, we could be victims, we could be witness to them, or we could be perpetrators. The environment, proactively creating an environment where we are inclusive and conscious. And these are referred to sometimes as micro-affirmations, so equal eye contact, body language. How many times have you gone into a room and maybe you've kind of experienced this yourself where, the host hasn't even made any eye contact with you and just not acknowledged that you're there? Time and attention. So, we tend to remember more information from those that are similar to us. So make a conscious decision to remember people's names. And in the digital era, it's even more important to ensure everyone is offered an opportunity to contribute. It's difficult to kind of interrupt and, disrupt a meeting. So having an agenda, especially when it's online. So having an agenda that's shared beforehand and then making a conscious decision as a host, maybe, to include everyone in discussions. And provide relational support, be there, be that second pair of eyes and ears of microaggressions. One of the main things that victims experience is doubt. Did that actually happen? I recently attended a degree apprenticeship assessment centre with my son, and I noticed that as we walked in, nobody really acknowledged us. And then we sat down and I really didn't think anything of it. And then as the white boys walked in with their parents, the actual centre manager went out of his way to say hello, said hello to the parents, said hello to the boys. And so we were completely ignored whilst we were sat there. And I kind of felt, am I just being oversensitive about this situation? And then over lunch, I spoke to a mother of a black girl who was also in attendance. And she said she'd experienced exactly the same behaviour. And so it kind of confirmed that it did actually happen. And actually, at the end of it, based on a couple more experiences that my son went through, we both decided our child, it's not the place that we want our child to be at. And finally, on a personal level, provide the allyship. Did that just happen? Challenge the microaggression you see. People who experience this can be seen as being oversensitive, like I said, and be that second pair of eyes, challenge and speak up and support those that speak up. This is a useful document that I found on allyship, and it's this kind of a guide on how you can become a really good ally. And what I'll do is I'll share this link to this document after this session as well, so you've got that to hand. So we've put together like 3 points of action that you can do. So firstly, identify the behaviour. This could be with yourself or something that you've witnessed. Secondly, challenge the behaviour. Stop and think. Use your slow thinking modern brain. Don't speak on behalf of someone. Highlight what you've witnessed so that the behaviour is identified. It's most likely to be an innocent comment with no bad intentions. However, by pointing it out and explaining how the comment has made you feel, you educate and you challenge it. Find colleagues to further information. And there's lots of people out there that don't even know what a microaggression is or what that means or if that behaviour is actually a microaggression. Third point of action is to role model inclusive behaviours yourself. I used to do this, found out this, it makes people feel like this, now I do this. It's not defensive, it's not aggressive, it's educating. Here's a little scenario. So the weekly team meeting is currently taking place online. There's some real expertise on the team, and you've noticed that Seema raises her hand but is often ignored. So in this situation, what would you do? You'd identify the behaviour, you know that Seema is being overlooked, probably quite innocently by the team host. Challenge the behaviour, stop and think, don't speak on behalf of Seema, highlight what you've witnessed so the behaviour is identified. Get in touch with the meeting host post-meeting and air your concerns. Ask that you put something in place, a mechanism in place that allows everyone to have an opportunity to speak. Maybe circulate the agenda ahead of the meeting. It's most likely going to be an innocent comment with no bad intentions. However, by pointing it out and explaining how the comment has made you feel, you educate, challenge, and find a solution. Here's a couple of top tips I've put together on avoiding bias. And these are some top tips that you can do yourself. First step is to recognize that we all have biases. Take the implicit association test. We'll send you the link for that as well after this. It's a free online tool and it's fantastic. You can just kind of have a look at how you're biased against gender, race, and many other characteristics. Stop, and that's for yourself, for your own personal development. Stop and think. Don't always trust your first impressions. If you've got a question about anything, if for my example, if someone's got a question about my faith or they've got a question about my race or my background, I'd prefer it if they ask me rather than making assumptions about that. And don't overcomplicate processes, keep them simple. Here's some more. So schedule emotional work away from people decisions. Look at your recruitment processes, who's hiring, who's making decisions. Stop the bias creeping in. Recognize that racism and sexism hasn't gone away. It's different. All of these biases are still there. They've mutated and they're different. Educate yourself and share your learning with others. I'm learning new concepts every day. And if you ever see my LinkedIn feed, there's always some paper or research that I've come across on how to tackle these kinds of behaviours. So it's not, there's not a quick silver bullet that's going to fix all of this, but it's a constant learning that we all have kind of a responsibility to do. I'm going to stop here and see if there's any questions at this point before I finish off. So Evelyn, is there anything that has come through?
Yeah, we've got some really great questions here. So the first one I've got here is, what if you raise the issue, but it continues, so presumably in the workplace?
I think it depends on the systems that you've got in place within your workplace. So, if it's something that you can report to your line manager, then do that. And if not, then it's, you can go to you will have policies in place of where you can kind of take this issue further. There is always, there is something that can always be done. I mean, even for the person who's kind of experienced this, providing that allyship to them, is probably more valuable than anything else as well, backing them up.
Great. We've got another question here, which is, what else can I do to find out more about this?
So there's lots of resources online. We're going to share some with you after this session as well. We've got our own introduction to diversity training, so you can have a look at that as well. That builds on some of the content that we've delivered today. So there's lots of ways that you can get involved in that.
Great. Do we have any time for any more?
I'll just finish off now with my final slides. Okay. And if there's any other questions, I'll give you some contact details to get in touch with us as well directly if you want. So On to my next slide. So here's some information about us. Get in touch if you've got any comments or suggestions of webinars you'd like to see in the future. You can contact me directly on my email or through info@ account. I regularly post on LinkedIn, so it's good to have conversations and discussions on there. There's not, you know, we might not agree on the same thing, but it's always good to be having these conversations openly. There's Twitter too, and we post all our upcoming events on there too. We have a webinar on intersectionality next, which I think everyone's going to provide you some more information about, and you can find details on the website, and we'll send you the link afterwards as well. And finally, I just want to finish on this. I want you to spend a few moments reflecting on what you've kind of heard from me today. Is there anything that you could do going forward to minimize the impact of microaggressions, micro-incivilities, bias and stereotypes? And what's your top action following on from this session? And I've listed a few on there. So educating yourself, challenging poor behavior, be an ally, and have a couple of links handy that you can share when you're explaining what these terms mean. I think somebody, when they ask that question about what can we do, find out what happens within your organization, how would that be dealt with within your organization, ask those questions so that nobody else has to go through any of that as well. And, you know, we're open to discussion. So if you've got any kind of thoughts on the topics that we've discussed today, please do get in touch and share those as well. So thank you very much for joining us today. And I think I've done that in time as well for you. Thank you.